got the primary coming up next week, Tuesday, and then the first Tuesday in April, we've got the general election. We have 5 members of the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce judges on the state Supreme Court and 2 common sense judges. So we have a chance this election to at least replace one of them, David Kelly, who, if you read the article in the paper this morning where all 3 candidates expressed their views, that David Kelly's really a piece of work. And so we really need to replace him with one of the 2 fine people who are with us tonight. And if you 2 fine people could come up, Ed and Jill, come on up. We will hear what they have to say. This is an opportunity for you to hear both of them speak, and I think it's a tough choice. So, say what? Oh yes, okay. Just want to mention you've got index cards at your table. If you have questions for the candidates, please fill them up. Raise your hand, and someone will collect them. After their initial remarks, they will answer your questions.
Thanks, Keith. Hello, everyone. I'm Ed Fallone. For those of you who don't know me, maybe 2 or 3 people in the room. I wanted to first acknowledge the presence of some dignitaries in the room, very important people, VIPs. My wife, Heidi, here. Thank you, Heidi. This is North Shore Presbyterian Church is our home church. Both of our children, Andrew and Emma, were baptized here. And Heidi has served every possible function in church leadership, deacon, elder, church school, you name it. So welcome here. I also want to acknowledge some of the elected officials here who have endorsed my campaign. Senator Chris Larson, thank you. David Crowley, State Representative. Carmen Cabrera, Milwaukee Elections Commission. Judge Gene Keyes is here. If you're running for county executive and you have not yet endorsed my campaign, there's still time. Contact me. This is a really important election for state Supreme Court. And I also want to acknowledge everyone here who told me, I don't need one of your yard signs, Ed, because I still have in my basement your yard signs from 2013, and I'm getting them out and I'm putting them in my front yard. Thank you for that. This is our chance to make change on the state Supreme Court. This is our chance for something different on our state Supreme Court. And I went driving through 2 hours of a blizzard last Saturday to get to Appleton for an event. I was the only candidate in the race to make it there, and then I drove 2 hours through the blizzard back home. And it was an event in Appleton that was called Pancakes, Porkies, and Politics. And I loved the alliteration. And I thought, I got to come up with something like that for my campaign. So what I want to say in my 10 or 12 minutes here is I want to talk to you about change, choice, and qualifications. It's a work in progress. Stick with me, folks. Change. We need different perspectives on our state Supreme Court. We know our state Supreme Court's been going in the wrong direction. And we know that it no longer serves all of us in Wisconsin. Instead, it's hardened into political divisions, where the left and the right on the court don't even talk to each other. And they're not doing their job, which is representing everyone in the state and keeping politics out of our highest court. And the way to get past that is to have true change and a different perspective on the court. And I'm a different kind of candidate. I'm a law professor, a constitutional law expert. I've been teaching at Marquette University Law School for 27 years, teaching constitutional law, criminal law, business law to over 2,300 members of the state bar. Many of my former students are now judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys. I think Governor Evers, 4 of his last appointments to the circuit court are former students of mine. Many of you met my wonderful campaign manager, Chelsea Cross, as she went around the room. Oh, you can give it up for Chelsea. Chelsea's mother is, of course, Judge Danielle Shelton, who was the first Black woman elected to the circuit court in Milwaukee County history. And Danielle was a former student of mine, big endorser of my campaign. Many of you know State Representative Evan Goyke, who leads the Democrats in the State Assembly and is doing such a great job in Madison. He's a former student of mine, big endorser of my campaign. So I've got leaders in our state, former students of mine, and I thought that was going to be my contribution to the state of Wisconsin over my career. But I didn't stop there. I've been in the nonprofit sector for over 25 years in southeastern Wisconsin, leading organizations that try to make our justice system work better for everyone. My whole life I've had one principle. The kind of justice you get should not depend on how much money you have. I started my career as a corporate lawyer. I graduated from one of the nation's best law schools, top of my class. I spent 4.5 years representing Fortune 100 corporations. I saw the quality of legal justice they got. They got the best justice money could buy. They had the top lawyers in the country. They had me. But after 4.5 years, I decided I don't want to spend my career representing corporate America. And that's when I turned to Heidi and I said, I want to quit my job and I want to become a professor. And thank God my wife, who I love dearly, said, you do it. Thank you, Heidi. And so that's what I've been doing. But I also knew from being a corporate lawyer, the quality of justice those corporations get. And I also knew that, because I grew up in a working family, my father, a public school teacher, my mother, a Mexican immigrant, raising 4 kids on a public school teacher salary, I knew that working families face challenges. They can't always afford, whether it's an unexpected hospital bill, an unexpected legal bill, a lawsuit, or a divorce, something comes up, they can't always afford a lawyer. And sometimes they have to go alone to the courthouse. And so that's why I spent 25 years leading groups like Centro Legal, Legal Center in Spanish, that provides low-cost lawyers to families and individuals with family law, divorce, domestic violence issues. The Catholic Charities Legal Services for Immigrants, that provides low-cost lawyers to our immigrant community in deportation proceedings when they're trying to prove they face political persecution in their home country, or that a woman faces a domestic abuser in her home country if returned. And they need help making their legal claim, but they can't afford a lawyer. And I've led groups like the Latino Community Center, intervening with at-risk youth on the south side of Milwaukee, some of our city's toughest neighborhoods, highest teen pregnancy rate, highest teen dropout rate, highest gang activity rate. These were kids in the school to prison pipeline. They would get suspended from school, they'd be on the street. They'd be unsupervised because they were in single parent homes. And they would break into parked cars, they would engage in risky sexual activity, and they get sucked into gangs, and they end up going to prison. And we gave them a safe place to be after school. Over 100 kids every school night getting a free hot meal, supervised homework help, and in a safe space until their parents could pick them up. So I have been working for our families, our immigrants in our state in the nonprofit sector, trying to make the system work better from the outside. And now I'm running for the state Supreme Court because I know how to make it better from the inside. I will be that perspective, that voice, a law professor who stood shoulder to shoulder with our working families in the legal system, because we don't have that voice represented. We have 3 justices out of 7 who are former prosecutors who went on to be trial judges. There's nothing wrong with that. Do we need a 4th? What are we missing right now? Change is the first C. Choice is the second. We can choose the kind of justice we want. We can imagine what voice do we want to see on our state Supreme Court. We have that power. In this election, we have that choice. Now, I would argue to you what we need on the court is someone like Justice Shirley Abramson, who just retired after 4 decades as a nationally recognized leader, one of the greatest state Supreme Court justices in Wisconsin history. She was a law professor before she was appointed to that court. She never spent 1 day as a trial judge. Or you might say, I want to see someone on our state Supreme Court like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a defender of civil liberties, equal rights for women, a true icon in United States history. Of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was appointed to the appellate court by President Clinton. She was a law professor who never spent 1 day as a trial judge. What we need on our court is not 7 justices with the exact same experience. What we need is a variety of experiences, a diversity of points of view, people who understand different perspectives and can bring it to the court. And we need someone who has been running a campaign since day one that is affirmative, focused on my qualifications, and has been trying to keep politics out of this race. Because I know one thing from traveling the state of Wisconsin. No one in our state wants to see our court system turn into a political football. We are tired. We're tired of every day seeing partisan politics infect government and prevent us from getting things done. And it's what's happening on our court. We have justices on the right who don't talk to the justices on the left. And I read those opinions, and it's as if they're not even in the same courthouse. They're not talking to each other. I have not attacked anyone on the court. I have not poisoned the well. I know all the justices. They know me as a law professor. They know I won't engage in personal attacks. I'm the candidate, once elected, who can build consensus, find compromise, and get the politics out of the system so that the court focuses on its job, which is representing all of us, not just representing Republicans, not just representing Democrats, representing all of us. That's their job. And now to my final C, qualifications. This is our chance. This is our opportunity to have a different kind of justice on the court for the next 10 years. And sometimes when you say the word different or you say the word diverse, people say, yeah, but what about qualifications? I am the most qualified candidate in the race. I am regularly sought out for my opinion on constitutional and legal issues by national and even international media. I was asked by Senator Herb Kohl to advise him on 4 United States Supreme Court nominations when he sat on the Judiciary Committee getting ready to ask questions of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan. I was one of the small group of advisors he asked to help him review their judicial decisions and give him advice on what questions to ask. When I wrote about the Merrick Garland nomination to the U.S. Supreme Court by President Obama, and I wrote how Mitch McConnell and the Senate were violating the Constitution by obstructing the nomination and refusing to grant a hearing, the Obama White House, the Office of Communications, called me and they asked me, Ed, will you say that and explain that to the national media in a national press conference? And I did, and I was one of only 3 law professors in the country that they approached. I am ready on day one to decide the important issues that the Supreme Court faces, not just criminal issues, but issues of our constitutional rights, our right of free speech, our right to vote, our right of reproductive choice. I am ready on day one as a constitutional law professor, someone who understands the challenges of our working families and our immigrant communities in the legal system. Someone whose advice has been sought at the highest levels. And I would be the first Latino ever to serve on our state Supreme Court. You can have it all. You can have a different kind of justice with a different perspective. You can have a choice, the kind of justice you want to see representing you, and you can have the most qualified candidate in the race. Thank you all for being here. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Ed. Up next, Joe Karofsky from Dane County.
Thank you. Good evening, Grassroots North Shore. I am very happy to be here. I want to begin by thanking all of you for all the important work that you do. You all know what I know, that elections in this state on the local, on the regional, on the state, and on the national level are won at the margins. The last Supreme Court race in the state was won by less than 6,000 votes. So every door that you knock on, every sign that you get stuck into the frozen tundra, every time you walk up to a door and try to find a pen that works, and I know all about which pens don't freeze in the dead of winter because I've been knocking on doors since I was 8 years old. Thank you. It makes a difference. This is what democracy looks like. My name is Jill Karofsky. I'm a judge. I'm running for the Wisconsin Supreme Court because we have got to get this court back on track. I have spent the past several months traveling all around Wisconsin, and I hear the same thing from voters. They are concerned by what they see on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. They see justices who make decisions before anyone ever walks into the state Supreme Court chamber. They see justices who refuse to follow the rule of law. They see justices who are more interested in protecting corporations than in protecting our air and our water and our planet from corporate pollution. They see justices who are acting like politicians, and all of that feels like corruption to people. That is not what democracy looks like. I cannot overstate how important this race is. This race has incredible consequences for the future of the state of Wisconsin. Think about the cases the Supreme Court's going to hear in the next few years. As sure as I'm standing here, they're going to hear a case about gerrymandering, right? We're all going to fill out our census forms at the beginning of April, and as a result of that, legislative lines in Wisconsin will be redrawn. And when they are redrawn, there is going to be litigation, and that litigation is going to end up at the doors of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Our Supreme Court is very likely to hear cases about women's access to health care, about Wisconsin's response to the climate crisis. How are we going to keep our air and our water clean? What's our response going to be to gun violence, to criminal justice reform? What is democracy in the state of Wisconsin going to look like? That's what's at stake in this election. So I'm in this race to offer a very clear choice. On the one hand, you got a guy named Dan Kelly. Dan Kelly was the last person Scott Walker appointed to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And Scott Walker put Dan Kelly on the court, even though Dan Kelly did not have 1 minute of judicial experience. But that didn't matter to Dan. That didn't matter to Scott Walker, because he wanted to put someone on the court who he knew would carry the water of the wealthy, would carry the water of corporations, would carry the water of the right-wing special interests. And Dan Kelly has done just that. He has not spilled a drop of their water. I'm bringing 3 things to this race. I'm bringing my experience, I'm bringing my energy, and I'm bringing my values. As far as my experience, I'm the only person in this race who is or who has ever been a trial court judge. I sit in court every day. I heard over 1,700 cases just last year. I see how the law impacts real people. I apply the law fairly and equally. I follow the rule of law every day in my courtroom. And where you sit where I sit, you know that the law isn't some esoteric exercise. It's not an esoteric exercise if you are a victim of a crime or you are a defendant suffering from an opioid addiction. It is not an esoteric exercise if you are in the middle of a divorce and someone is telling you how your property is going to be split up and they're telling you where your kids are going to sleep tonight. It's not an esoteric exercise if you are a landlord or you are a tenant and you are involved in an eviction action. I'm also the only person in this race who has been a prosecutor. I know how to be smart on crime. I know the importance of protecting the rights of individuals, of defendants, of witnesses, of victims, of members of the public. I've also been a victim advocate. I was Wisconsin's first violence against women resource prosecutor. And then I was the head of the Office of Crime Victim Services. I worked in every county in this state to make sure that crime victims got the services and the help and the support that they needed as their case was working its way through the criminal justice system. That's the experience I'm bringing to this race and the experience I'm going to bring to the Supreme Court. As far as my values, I'm born and raised in Wisconsin. I grew up in South Central Wisconsin. My mom was mayor of the small city that I grew up, where I was growing up. I watched my mom bring emergency medical service into my town. She brought buses in so people had access to public transportation. My first experience in a courtroom, I was only 10 years old. I marched in there hiring my own lawyer to change my middle name so I could be named after my mom because I was so proud of her. My dad was a local pediatrician. And the first thing my dad did when he retired was open up a free clinic for teenagers because he knew that these kids wouldn't have access to health care unless someone provided it for them for free. My parents taught me the importance of my community, the importance of public service. Today, I'm the head of my own house. I am the single mom of 2 teenagers. My 16-year-old got his driver's license this week, so I'm coming to grips with that. It's awesome and terrifying. My kids and I all went to public school. We have benefited from wonderful teachers. To any teacher in the room, thank you. I talk to my kids about the importance of women's rights and workers' rights and civil rights and human rights. And when I talked to my kids about getting into this campaign, I said, what are you guys concerned about? My kids are concerned about gun violence. They don't want to go to school anymore for code red drills. They want to go to school to learn. And they're concerned about the climate crisis. They understand what is going on with our planet. And our kids see corruption at the state and the federal level, and they're looking to us, the grown-ups in the room, to solve these problems for them. It's the least we can do for all of our kids. Those are the values I'm bringing to this race. As for my energy, I was a state high school tennis champion. I was a D1 athlete in track and cross country. I finished the Ironman triathlon 2 times. I now can run 50-mile races. I ran a 50-mile race at the beginning of August. I started in Belleville, south of Monroe, back to Belleville. 11 hours, 22 minutes, and 3 blisters later, and I was done. We had a campaign event in October. I drove up to Ashland on a Friday night, got up on Saturday morning, ran the entire Whistle Stop Marathon, 26.2 miles, took a fast shower, went to a campaign event in Washburn. The next day, drove to Merrill, Green Bay, got back to Madison around 9 or 10 that night. The next morning, Monday, I was back on the bench at 8 o'clock. I'm telling you this for one reason and one reason only. I have never been outworked or out-hustled, and there is no way in this race Dan Kelly is going to outwork or out-hustle me. So I am very honored to have the endorsement of Justice Rebecca Dallett. Thank you. I am honored to have the endorsement of the last 3 Democratic governors in Wisconsin, Governors Doyle, Shriver, and Earl. I have the endorsement of over 25 state legislators from all over the state of Wisconsin. I have bipartisan support from judges and from DAs and from sheriffs and from local officials from every corner of this state. We know that to win this election, though, we also need a grassroots campaign. We have raised money from 2,000 individual contributions in this state. We have raised almost $400,000 because people are joining our campaign every day. They are excited about our campaign. They are excited about our message, and they understand what is at stake here. I want to leave by giving you 3 dates. The first date is February 18th. February 18th is the primary. It's only 3 weeks from Tuesday. We need you to get to the polls. We need you to get your friends and your families and everyone you know to the polls to vote on February 18th. The second date is April 7th. April 7th is the general election in this state, this race, and the primary for the presidential race. We're expecting voter turnout to be high. But we need people to vote all the way down the ballot. In 2016, that did not happen, and we paid a price for that. The third date is this, 2023. We will not have the opportunity to elect another justice to the Wisconsin Supreme Court until 2023. This is our year. 2020 is our year to win back your seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And my commitment to you tonight is that I am going to run as hard and as fast as I can between now and April 7th. I'm going to win this race. I need your help. I need everyone on board. Our website is jillforjustice.com. We have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter page. We have an Instagram page because my kids said, "Mom, you got to have an Instagram page." I hear it's nice. And we have yard signs. Thank you, Justice Dallett. We have yard signs as well over here if anyone wants a yard sign. Thank you very much. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Jill. Appreciate it. All right, we're not done yet. We do have a question from the audience, and if you have questions, and I see that they're being gathered, we will take care of those as well. Now, we sort of know from Jill what her thought is on this, but if you want to reiterate, the first part of this question is, do you support fair maps? You want to look right in it, or you?
Sure.
Yeah.
Look, the right to vote is a cornerstone of our democracy, and everyone's vote should count the same as everyone else's vote. And what they are trying to do, and what we've seen them do through voter ID, through gerrymandering, with the voter purge case, there is a concerted effort to try to restrict people's access to the ballot box. And that is something that none of us should stand for. That is my answer, is that everyone's vote needs to count the same as everyone else's vote, and it really tells you why this race is important. I mean, the issue of gerrymandering is something that we have all lived through the last 10 years. And you all know right now exactly how Dan Kelly would rule if a gerrymandering case came in front of him. And the difference between Dan Kelly and me is that I follow the rule of law. I follow the rule of law in my courtroom every day. I'm the only person in this race who has a track record of following the rule of law. And we don't see that in Dan Kelly.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Ed?
Thanks. Thank you. So, the right to vote. Just taught my constitutional law class about one person, one vote earlier this week. When we had the Wisconsin voter ID law passed, I did an analysis of it, explained how it could be challenged in court as unconstitutional, in particular pointing out that it operated like a poll tax because there was no waiver for poor people who were asked to get a driver's license so they could vote, and that made it unconstitutional potentially. The Government Accountability Board used my writing to help train their staff on the state of voting right law. There was a lawsuit brought challenging the voter ID law, making the same arguments that I had pointed out when I wrote about it. Our state Supreme Court ended up upholding the voter ID law by rewriting it to include a waiver for poor people so they wouldn't have to pay. They recognized that was absolutely right, but they changed the law to uphold it so that we have voter ID. Why am I talking about this? We need to have justices who understand constitutional law. It's great to talk about the right to vote. It's right there in our state constitution. It's important, but we need to have justices who understand how to defend it. Our Constitution is best understood as a machine that allows us to participate in the making of the laws we live under. We all remember our middle school civics class, the Revolutionary War. No taxation without representation is why we had a revolution. We weren't libertarians. We weren't saying never tax us. We were saying we have a right to participate in the making of the laws we live under. And that's why we have a revolution, and that's why we have a constitution. And the problem with extreme voter ID laws and the problem with gerrymandered legislative districts is it takes away our ability to participate. It takes away our vote. And I can guarantee you this, as a justice on the state Supreme Court, I will absolutely defend our right to be heard in the making of the laws we live under.
All right. Thank you. Part two of this question, will you support voter rights like automatic voter registration at age 18 and protecting same-day voter registration?
Well, again, we're talking about the right to vote, and these are policy decisions how best to make it easy for people to vote. And as a state Supreme Court justice, we don't get the opportunity to initiate policy decisions. We see them on the back end after the law has been passed, deciding whether or not it's allowed, whether or not it violates our constitutional right, whether it restricts our right to vote. But I will say this, we have two constitutions we live under. We have our United States Constitution. It was ratified in 1789. It doesn't say one word about voting rights. It was left to the states. We also have in Wisconsin our Wisconsin Constitution, ratified in 1848. By then, it includes an explicit right to vote that can be protected. And the reason I raised the Wisconsin Constitution is because in Wisconsin we have a very progressive constitution. And what does that mean? If you understand the state constitution, progressive, and the progressive movement that was born in Wisconsin was about the basic idea that the greater the number of people who vote, the more legitimate government is. And that is a progressive value. It can be traced to Wisconsin. It's in our Constitution. Access to the right to vote, the expansion of the right to vote, is part of Wisconsin's history.
I think this is something that Ed Fallone and I agree upon, is that we don't want to restrict people's access to the ballot. We want to expand people's access to the ballot. And to help 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, I mean, that population is less likely to be voting than folks who are older. And whatever we can do to get those folks registered, to get them to the polls, to educate them so that they know what they're voting for and who they would best represent them is hugely, hugely important. We have to understand that there is a concerted effort in this state and in this country to restrict people's access to the polls. We cannot take our eyes off of that, because when we do, things happen like what happened in 2010 with our gerrymandered districts in this state. And we have, every single one of us has paid a price for it, and we're going to continue to pay a price for it in the future. We have to have our antennas up. We have to be looking for this, because they're going to continue to be acting like that. And we know when any one of these cases, if there's litigation about 18-year-olds being able to register, if that litigation gets to the Supreme Court, you know how Dan Kelly's going to vote on it. Every single one of these issues, you all know how he's going to vote on it. He will be a disaster. 10 more years of him in this state.
Thank you. I actually think I know where this question came from. Okay, state court justices weigh in on critical environmental issues in our state. A 2011 law shifted authority from the DNR to elected officials and other state agencies. How would you weigh in on this? We'll start off with that.
Sure, it's your turn. I'm happy to. Go ahead. Nope.
When it comes to the administrative agencies in the state of Wisconsin, it is really clear based on the Karofsky case, which was a case that the Supreme Court decided at the end of their last term. Lawrence is doing this now.
We got some problems.
In June of 2019, we saw them reverse a decision that they had made in 2016. And that 2019 case was a 180-degree different decision than they had made in 2016. And the only thing that changed, as Justice Ann Walsh Bradley said, the only thing that changed in that decision was the makeup of the court. So law changes in the state of Wisconsin because of the makeup of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And Dan Kelly was part of that decision, part of that Karofsky decision in 2019. Look, the right-wing special interests in this case, in this state, corporations in this state, do not want administrative rules. They don't want them. They're not concerned about polluting our air and our water. They're not concerned about our planet. They're concerned with making money. And what they're concerned with, they're keeping justices on the Supreme Court who are going to rule in their favor every time that they have the chance to do that. And so that's what you have in the Supreme Court right now. That's why it feels like it's so corrupt. Because decisions aren't being made based on what the law is, and decisions aren't being made based on what precedent is. But decisions are being made because someone like Dan Kelly is on the court, he is put on the court by the right-wing special interests. They are going to work really, really hard to keep him on the court. And he is going to continue to rule in their favor over and over and over again, especially with decisions like this.
Thank you.
My opponent and I have a very different perspective. I don't believe it's possible to run a campaign pointing at sitting Supreme Court justices, who I may disagree with, calling them corrupt, calling them tools of the right wing, and then get elected and work with them and find common ground. I think we have a problem right now, today, on our state Supreme Court, because the conservatives on the court aren't talking to the liberals on the court. They're not trying to find common ground. They are in their camps. And they talk about us versus them. I don't talk that way. For 30 years in my career, I've talked about basic principles that I believe in and I fight for. One of those principles that I've fought for and been consistent is local control. We have it in our state constitution, a home rule provision. Our state Supreme Court has ignored that. We have state laws being passed in Madison and state legislature that take away the ability of local communities to solve local problems. And as I go around the state of Wisconsin, and I was in Kewaunee County, and I asked residents, what's your biggest concern? What I heard again and again is we have these giant corporate dairy farms, and the manure runoff is poisoning our well water. And we're told that our city, our town, can't do anything about it, that the rules have to be set by the state legislature. And when I went to Platteville in Grant County, and I asked them, what are the local issues here that concern you? They said there are these giant corporate pig farms, and the runoff is poisoning our water, and we're being told we can't do anything about it. And who's ultimately deciding who gets to make the rules, who can protect drinking water. It's our state Supreme Court that is eviscerated, did away with our home rule provision in the Constitution, and that is consistently upholding state control, statewide rules, and striking down local attempts at control. And I have been writing about this and arguing about this for my entire career consistently. Now that is a principle that I've been fighting for, and I've also fought to defend free speech, and I fought to defend equal rights for our immigrant communities and our LGBTQ communities. I have fought for principles, but I have never demonized any person on our court. I've never accused anyone of bad faith or corruption. I can work with this court. I can find common ground, and I can bring people over to defending the basic principles that are in our Constitution. And I think that's a big difference in this race.
Thank you. All right, okay, thank you. All right, Ed, do you support public schools or school choice?
Softball, Keith said as he handed me the microphone. Because Keith knows, my father was a public school teacher. He taught high school English his whole career. He was a proud member of the Maryland State Teachers Union. I saw firsthand the impact of his union membership on my family's life. My father died 20 years ago. To this day, my mother has economic security and health care because of my father's union membership. When Act 10 was passed, I stood up, I spoke out about the constitutional defects in the process by which Act 10 was passed, the violations of the open meetings law, the procedural mess caused by our state Supreme Court rushing to hear the case with a false sense of urgency. I stood up, I spoke out against it. When the recall process against Scott Walker was launched as a result, I spoke out to defend the recall process and to defend individuals, judges in particular, who had signed recall petitions and disciplinary proceedings were launched against them. I explained why those were illegitimate. Judges, following my analysis, threw out the disciplinary cases. I have consistently defended public education in our state across multiple fronts because I know, as the son of a public school teacher, as a father of 2 children who went to public schools in the state, my daughter Emma was the U.S. Presidential Scholar for the state of Wisconsin in 2012. These are the top 140 high school students in the country selected every year. That was partly her hard work, her talent, but it was also a tribute to the teachers in the Whitefish Bay School District as well. I understand what public education has done for me and my family, and I have defended it consistently in my career.
All right.
I said it in my speech when I talk about my kids. My kids and I all went to public schools, and we benefited from wonderful, wonderful teachers. My daughter is a sophomore in college. My son is a sophomore in high school. And one of the things I thought about when I was trying to figure out where I was going to raise them was what would be the best public school for them. And so we have all benefited. I have seen, as many of you have seen, what happened after Act 10 to our schools. I have seen our teachers have to work 100 times as hard with 1/100th of the resources. I'm traveling here today with my friend, one of my best friends, Holly Dowling, who was a teacher at the Verona schools when all this was going down. My kids marched in the Act 10 protests, and I was shoulder to shoulder with them. We have to support public education in this state. It's one of the things that makes our state great. We have to support teachers in this state. They make our kids great, which truly is the future of Wisconsin. So I talk about it every speech I give. I'm going to continue to talk about it in every speech I get. Thank you to any teacher who is in this room.
Thank you. Wisconsin has one of the highest incarceration rates in the country for a black population. It stands out as among the worst. What do you think the role of the state Supreme Court is in rectifying that problem?
As the only person in this race who sits in a courtroom every day, and I sit in a criminal rotation, so I handle criminal cases, mostly criminal cases, every day in my courtroom. I can tell you firsthand that we have big problems in this state when it comes to our criminal justice system. So I think we need to do three things. The first thing is we need to recognize that there is a problem. And I'm going to tell you there's a problem. We have a problem with racial disparity in our criminal justice system, and we have a problem with mass incarceration. And I think if you ask Dan Kelly, he would deny that either of those things is an issue. The second thing that we need to do is we need to have judges who are going to take steps to mitigate those issues. And I do that all the time. When I have the opportunity to defer someone to drug treatment court, to OWI treatment court, to veterans court, I do it. In Dane County, we have a 1-year-old community service program, so I can refer someone to a community service program so that instead of ordering them to pay a fine or ordering them to do jail time, and anytime I am able to do it, that is the course of action that I take. So that's the second thing. We need to have judges who are courageous, who are willing to take action to mitigate the problem. The third thing is, I'm not running for the legislature. I'm not running to be a policymaker. But I sure can, and I believe I sure have a responsibility to tell the policymakers what I am seeing every day, to inform them so that they can make decisions, so that they can make the changes that we have got to see in the state of Wisconsin.
All right, thank you.
I was the first candidate to declare in this race way back in March. Hard to believe. And now the primary is almost upon us, February 18th. Got yard signs. I was the first candidate to declare in this race, and when I did, criminal justice reform was one of the first issues I talked about. And I know about this. First of all, I was a criminal defense lawyer. We have not had someone who represented the accused on our state Supreme Court for over 10 years. But I was a criminal defense lawyer. I also worked with at-risk youth, right? I think my opponent and I saw the same sort of young offenders. She saw them in the halls of the courthouse. I saw them in their neighborhood while they were getting peer pressure to join gangs. I was there with them in their neighborhood. And so I know and understand our justice system should not be the knee-jerk solution to antisocial conduct. We use it as a cheap and easy way. Well, it's not cheap. It's an easy way to deal with substance abuse problems, to deal with mental health issues, to deal with homelessness. And that's why we have mass incarceration. And the problem is we've had prosecutors just focused on their job, get people convicted, right? And we had judges, trial judges, just focused on their job, make sure the two sides play by the rules in my courthouse. That's all I care about. And defense counsel, you know what? They've got a caseload of 300, 400 open cases. They think their job is just, I have to cut a deal. And no one was looking at the big picture. What is going on here? And that's how we had the numbers of people behind bars rise and rise and rise. It's very simple. We need to address mass incarceration. There are three ways we can do it. We have diversion courts in Wisconsin. We have courts, specialty courts that deal with people with substance abuse problems, veterans who have issues, mental health issues. We have pilot programs around different counties, and they're funded by different counties. What we don't have is uniformity. We don't have expansion of these pilot and experimental programs to go statewide. I was in La Crosse. They have an excellent veterans court that they're rightfully proud of. In Waukesha County, they don't. You know what? There's almost as many veterans in Waukesha County. We need statewide solutions. The second thing we need to do, and here I applaud our current state Supreme Court Chief Justice, Patience Rogensack, who I ran against in 2013, but I recognize when she does something right. And she began collecting statistics in the court system, racial statistics on charging and sentencing, because we didn't know. And if you didn't know the numbers, how can you address the problem? I would expand that, and I would make sure that we don't come to premature conclusions. We get all the data. And then on the back end, we need to deal with people who have been released from prison and reintegrate them into society. And one of the big issues is that our court system maintains the criminal records of people, and it follows them for life. And if you have a criminal record, even after you've served your sentence, it can still be a barrier to you renting housing or getting a job. And then what happens if you can't find a place to live, you can't get a job, you drift back into crime. And so my former student, my endorser, Evan Goike, has been pushing an expungement bill in the Assembly, and I absolutely support that. That would allow people who have served their sentence to go to court and get their criminal sentence removed from the records. That's part of criminal justice reform. There's a challenge. We have progressive legislators like Evan Goyke. We have progressive district attorneys like John Chisholm, also an endorser of my campaign. They are trying to address criminal justice reform, and they are getting pushback. Pushback from judges and prosecutors who disagree and who want to get tough on crime, and they want to scare the public. And we see this happening in New York City. You can read the headlines in the New York Times. Progressive DAs, progressive judges are getting attacked. And we need to have our Supreme Court backing those who are making change. And we need to have justices on our Supreme Court who are not afraid to stand up and say, I support John Chisholm. I support the efforts of Evan Goyke, and to protect them from those tough on crime attacks.
All right, thank you. Might as well hang up there. Okay, what do you think is the single most important difference between you and Daniel Kelly? Besides height.
Daniel Kelly, from the moment he went to law school, Daniel Kelly knew what he believed. He chose to attend the Christian Broadcasting Network University School of Law, founded by televangelist Pat Robertson, dedicated to the principle that the United States Constitution should be interpreted in biblical terms. And when they say biblical, they mean Christian. They're not including Jewish in that. Why would he choose to go there? He knew what he believed. In his application to get appointed by Scott Walker, in the application, he was asked for a writing sample. What did he include? He included a writing sample where he compared affirmative action to slavery, said it was the moral equivalent of slavery, and where he said same-sex marriage was going to destroy traditional marriage and render it meaningless when anyone could then marry anything or any animal. He chose to include that as his writing sample, not a brief, not a legal document. And what happened? Of course, he got selected by Governor Walker for this position. The difference between me and Dan Kelly is he is an ideologue who, from the moment he decided to go to law school, had an agenda. And that's an agenda to interpret our state and federal constitution in accord with his predetermined, extreme viewpoints. And he has taken every opportunity he can to do so in his first 3 years. And he is going to try and continue to do that if he gets a full term. I'm a constitutional law professor. I've spent over 25 years studying our Constitution, writing about our Constitution, teaching it to our future lawyers in the state, our future leaders of the state. Okay. I am absolutely able in this upcoming general election, toe-to-toe with Dan Kelly, to demolish his extreme and crazy views on the public stage in front of the whole state. And I will be the candidate who is best able to defeat Dan Kelly.
Great, thank you.
Dan Kelly doesn't follow the rule of law. Dan Kelly knows where he wants to get to, and then he makes his decisions. He is outcome driven. He makes those decisions. And we see it time after time after time. Look, in the lame duck case, the Supreme Court couldn't even wait for the trial court to do its work and have an evidentiary hearing. They just plucked that case the day before Judge Remington in Dane County was supposed to hear it so that they could get it up to the Supreme Court. And we all know what the result of that case is going to be. Dan Kelly was asked in a debate that we had in November. He was asked, can you point out a time when you ruled against your personal, your political views? Tell us one instance. He couldn't and wouldn't do it because it's never happened. If I threw out any issue to you, you could tell me what his decision was going to be. He doesn't follow the rule of law. I follow the rule of law every day. I'm endorsed by defense attorneys. I'm endorsed by prosecutors. I'm endorsed by probation agents. I'm endorsed by victim advocates. If you come in my courtroom, you see someone who follows the rule of law. I treat everyone in my courtroom fairly and equally and respectfully. And when I'm interpreting the Constitution, I do it with today in mind because it is 2020. That is the difference. We can't afford to have Dan Kelly on our court until 2030. Imagine how many decisions, how many predetermined decisions he could make in the next 10 years. That would be disastrous for the state of Wisconsin. We need a justice on the Supreme Court who has a track record of following the rule of law, and I'm the only person in this race who has that track record. We need someone on the Supreme Court who has a track record for treating people equally and fairly in their courtroom. We need a justice on the Supreme Court who doesn't make decisions before cases get to the courtroom, but only after. I have looked at the law, and I've looked at the statutes, I have looked at the precedent, and I have analyzed the facts. And that's what I would do, and that's not what you have in Dan Kelly.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, that does it for the questions. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I think we've got some great candidates running for the state Supreme Court.